Lindsay, and today I'm going to be discussing my favorite show, The Golden Girls. The Golden Girls is a 1980s sitcom that is based off of four elderly women, Blanche, Dorothy, Sophia, and Rose, and these women all live under one roof in Miami. The women live active sex lives, portray themes of feminism, and displayed something that was truly unique for the time being. The show aired in the 1980s, like the mid-1980s, and went into the early 1990s. For this YouTube video, I'm going to be discussing 4 pivotal episodes that I find to be extremely important and relevant to this day. So the first episode I'm going to be looking into is titled Adult Education, and it's from season 1, episode 20. Now this episode has conflict involving my favorite character, Blanche Devereaux. She is a very openly sexual character. She's definitely the most promiscuous and vampy out of the 4 women, and she just is unapologetic for her love of sex, and I find her to be so liberating. Our sexy heroine, Blanche, wants to get a promotion at her job. In order to get that, she needs to achieve a degree. She's starting to struggle in the course, therefore she goes and asks her professor for help. Unfortunately, her professor gives her no aid and offers her an A in the class if he has sex with her. To summarize this conflict, Blanche goes to the dean of the university that she's attending and receives little to no assistance, as it being her word against his. Therefore, she seeks help in her roommates, who remind her that her self-worth is much more important than a passing grade, and also that she doesn't have to rely on her sexuality to achieve things in life. Therefore, Blanche studies her ass off and achieves a passing grade while giving her professor a piece of her mind. There are many emotions that I feel towards this episode. One has to be discouragement, because not only when you see it on a small screen, and this occurred in the 1980s, this also is way too familiar today, alongside the Me Too movement, when you see men in higher positions of power taking advantage of women who simply just need to get by, or in job opportunities with sex discrimination and sexism. It's just extremely frustrating to know that this is still occurring today. However, I find this episode to be extremely inspiring because Blanche is known to be such an openly sexual character that it would be so simple for her to take the easy way out. But she realizes her self-worth. She realizes that what's happening is not okay. No one can help her but herself. So she takes initiative and decides that she's going to get through this through her intelligence, and she manages it. Side note, it's also very empowering to see women helping other women, as Dorothy and Rose, Blanche's roommates, help her study for her tests and help her realize that she is more than just a sex object and that her intelligence is enough to pass this test. So the second episode I'm going to be analyzing is titled The End of the Curse, and this is on season 2, episode 1. Now this episode happens to be one of my favorites. I find it to be one of the funniest episodes in the entire series, and I find it can relate to women from their teenage years to their elderly years. I just find it can relate to such a broad spectrum of women. This episode also deals with my favorite character, Blanche, who is going through a crisis. At first, she believes that she is pregnant as she takes a pregnancy test and is completely hysterical. At first, the conflict is who's the father, because Blanche lives a very promiscuous lifestyle, so she is unaware of who the father would be, and also of how old she is, and being an elderly mother, that's a huge concern for the girls. However, we eventually learn that Blanche is not pregnant, luckily. She is simply just going through menopause. Now for the audience and for her fellow roommates, Dorothy, Sophia, and Rose, this is a relief that she is not pregnant and simply going through menopause. However, Blanche, not so much. She sees it as a sign of her sexuality fading away, and that is such an important aspect in Blanche's life. Her life revolves around men and sex. Therefore, Blanche is dealing with situational depression towards the issue. Alongside that, she's just hysterical and doesn't feel like doing anything, and just cries all day because she feels that her life is wasting away, while the other girls simply try to convince her that it's nothing to do with your sexuality and that menopause is a great thing and it's just a sign of getting older, and every woman eventually goes through it. This episode also has the 4 women discussing menstruation on television, which is a very interesting concept because we haven't seen it before and we don't really see it that much now. So with 4 women discussing their different experiences, the first time when they were young getting their periods to when they had them when they were older, through going through menopause, and just describing their different symptoms and realizing, and the audience realizing, that periods are different for every single woman was so important at that time, and it's still very important at this time. So that's why I need to discuss this episode, because although it's not a pressing issue like racism or discrimination against homosexuals or age discrimination that other episodes of the Golden Girls cover, this one, I find that it discusses a pivotal thing that every woman goes through, but no one talks about. To summarize this episode, Blanche rediscovers her sexuality through being awakened by a hot veterinarian coming back into her life and turning her on, basically. Also, she acknowledges that her roommates have also helped her realize that a woman can be sexually liberated at any age, regardless of going through menopause. So that is also an important lesson that we learned. But I also find this episode to be extremely important because of how it discusses a woman's sex life and how important it is to be sexually liberated and accepting of your body and its changes, because everyone goes through it. The third episode I'm going to be analyzing is titled 72 Hours, and it is from season 5, episode 19. Now this episode involves Rose, and Rose gets a letter from her hospital saying that she needs to come in for an emergency test for HIV, better known as AIDS, because of a blood transfusion that she experienced a few years ago. Now this episode takes a more serious note where Rose is more of the conservative, naive member of the bunch. So it's not expected that Rose would be diagnosed with such a life-threatening disease that has such a large stigmatism toward it, especially back in the 1980s and 1990s. The episode then pans to the next 72 hours, or 3 days, of Rose waiting for her test results, and you see the fear in Rose and the reaction of the roommates and how they would deal with Rose being diagnosed with such a terrifying disease at the time. Now, I find this to be such an important episode because it has a great discussion between Rose and Blanche, where Rose is discussing her fear and her self-loathing and her self-pity on possibly being diagnosed with AIDS, and discussing with Blanche, saying how she's a good person, she doesn't deserve this. Blanche has a very eye-opening conversation with Rose and basically puts her in her place and tells her that AIDS is not a bad person's disease, and it is most definitely not God punishing people for their sins. And I feel like this was needed to be said and needed to be broadcasted on television, and it can be looked back on still today because there's such a stigmatism towards individuals who are diagnosed with HIV, who have AIDS, and who are living with it every day. We have to be more open-minded towards these people and not assume that these people were careless or that it's meant for a certain demographic. And I feel that the Golden Girls really captured that and ran with it and told people straight. This episode also displays Sophia's ignorance towards the disease of HIV because she confesses into Blanche and Dorothy that with it being so close to her that it is scary, which she does have a right to feel scared about being so close near such a life-threatening disease at the time. But Dorothy and Blanche go to get through to Sophia and check her ignorance and educate her on that Rose will always be the same individual regardless of her disease. And I feel like that can apply to any individual, that regardless of what you are diagnosed with, you are still yourself and it does not define you. So I feel like that's a great message that the Golden Girls was portraying in that episode. To summarize that episode, all 3 roommates end up completely supporting Rose through the waiting process of her test results. Her test results come back negative, but she also gets a really good life lesson on the stigmatism towards AIDS and that it is not a bad person's disease and that your disease does not define you. The final episode I'm going to be analyzing in this video is titled Sister of the Bride, and it is from season 6, episode 14. This episode involves Blanche's brother Clayton coming into town. Now, Blanche is already very aware of her brother's sexual orientation. In a previous episode, in a previous season, he came out to her as homosexual, which it took her time to get used to, but she has professed to the girls that she has fully embraced his sexuality. However, as an audience, we are not fully convinced that Blanche is completely comfortable with Clayton's sexuality because Clayton brings home his special friend, Doug, who is actually his partner, and he announces to Blanche that they want to get married. This is a tough pill to swallow for Blanche. She doesn't fully understand why Clayton wants to do this, why he wants to get married, and why they want to parade it to the whole world that he's gay and that he's in love with a man. When Blanche is explained to Sophia why she doesn't understand why Clayton and Doug want to get married and profess their love to the world, Sophia basically explains that everyone deserves a chance at love, regardless of sexual orientation. If you love who you love, you deserve to get married. And it's a very good eye-opener for Blanche. She realizes that she has been extremely ignorant towards this whole situation and eventually gives Doug and Clayton her blessing. This actually wasn't the first episode that the Golden Girls tackled homosexuality. There was a previous episode in a previous season where Dorothy had a friend who was a lesbian come down and was attracted to Rose, and the show dealt with it in such a mature yet comedic way and professed that sexual orientation is not a big deal and it doesn't define who you are. And it also has a great message that everyone deserves love, and for a show back then to do something so groundbreaking and to pave the way for individuals to feel accepted on television was very inspiring to me, and I think it's just a great example of equality. After looking into depth into these 4 episodes, I truly believe that The Golden Girls is a timeless show and that it was really ahead of its time for entertainment and TV sitcoms. The show discussed other topics and themes alongside of these 4 episodes that I discussed, not limited to anti-Semitism, interracial relationships, assisted suicide, sexism, racism, oh my gosh, single motherhood and artificial insemination, teen pregnancy, the list goes on. And I just feel that it is such a relevant show to this day and that it's such a timeless show that everyone can learn and enjoy, and it's so inclusive. It deals with divorce. It deals with so many concepts that seem so taboo back then and still now that aren't fully accepted in today's society. So I really hope that my analyzation of these 4 episodes convinced you that this show truly is timeless and that it's really worth watching. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, and thank you for being a friend.